Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, the Browner Award for Excellence in Environmental Reporting, and the New England Environmental Leadership Award from Tufts University. He is the president of the World Media Foundation, Incorporated, and a lecturer in environmental science and public policy at Harvard University. Reverend Fred Small. Made by Bill McKibben one of the key figures in the religious environmental surge, Reverend Small is a Unitarian Universalist minister, song leader, and former environmental lawyer. He recently left parish ministry to help organize people of faith as a political force for climate change. Could we please welcome the two of them?
I want to thank the Citizens Climate Lobby and Steve Kerwood for inviting me to participate in this important teaching. I'm grateful to CCL for its national leadership for pricing carbon, and to Steve for his visionary work on NPR's Living on Earth. Not only does Steve have one of the best voices on radio, he has the most trustworthy voice on radio. Last month I left my job as senior minister of First Parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to devote my energies full-time to climate justice. It was that wasn't how a lot of my congregation felt, actually. It was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. I loved parish ministry and I loved my congregation, but I could not stay. Last February, I was privileged to participate in a workshop led by the extraordinary Buddhist teacher and activist Joanna Macy. Joanna invited us into pairs into an imaginary conversation with our own descendants 200 years in the future. And I wept. I wept tears of shame at how little I had done, how little I was doing to avert or at least to mitigate the catastrophe that my generation is inflicting upon our own descendants and right now upon the most vulnerable people on the planet. Those tears marked the beginning of the end of my parish ministry. I believe that religious political activism is the sleeping giant of the climate movement. People of faith understand the moral imperative of climate justice. Every religion forbids theft. Climate change is theft. It steals from our own children and from the most vulnerable people on the planet. Every religion commands us to care for creation. Climate change desecrates creation. Every religion calls us to protect and care for the weak and the vulnerable. Climate change devastates the weak and the vulnerable. One of Jesus' best-known parables is the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells of a traveler who was beaten, robbed, and left half dead by the side of the road. A priest and a Levite pass by without aiding him, but then a Samaritan rescues him. Who is our neighbor? The parable demands. Today, the victim by the side of the road is the Bangladeshi who loses his family in a flood. A teenager on the island nation of Tuvalu who has to flee her homeland before it is inundated by rising seas. The 85-year-old African-American grandmother in Chicago who dies in a heat wave. All these, Jesus would say, are our neighbors. Jesus charged his followers to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. People of faith concerned about climate, we've got the harmless as doves part down pretty good. Our opponents have been serpentine. The Koch brothers bankroll the Tea Party. The Tea Party rocks the Republican establishment and floods Congress and state legislatures with climate deniers and climate obstructionists thwarting climate legislation. People of faith, by and large, ban styrofoam from coffee hour, change our light bulbs, upgrade our boilers, hold Earth Day worship services, and have some really excellent ecology curricula for children's religious education. Some of our houses of worship even have solar panels on the roof. All virtuous. all harmless as doves. But I think we're beginning to wise up. Pope Francis has a lot to do with it. If you haven't read Laudato Si, the papal encyclical on climate, I recommend it. Whether or not you have any interest in religion, it's an amazing document. Most encyclicals are written for Catholics. This one is written for everybody. Here's some highlights. The earth is a shared inheritance whose fruits are meant to benefit everyone. Our goal is to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. We cannot presume to heal our relationship with nature and the environment without healing all fundamental human relationships. A true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. When I first read Laudato Si, I was thrilled to hear such passion for the earth and for social justice combined with a call to action on climate. But I had heard ringing declarations of creation care from religious leaders before, and they haven't changed anything. This time is different. Last week, researchers at Yale and George Mason Universities released a report they titled The Francis Effect: How Pope Francis Changed the Conversation About Global Warming. The report concluded that Pope Francis' encyclical and visit to the United States had a significant impact not only on Roman Catholics' view on climate, but American opinion overall. 17% of Americans and 35% of American Catholics say the Pope's position on global warming has influenced theirs. Between the publication of the Pope's encyclical last spring and the end of his visit here in the fall, the number of Americans who think climate change will significantly harm us in the United States increased by 9%, with the number of Catholics with this belief increasing by 13%. The number of Americans and American Catholics who think climate change will significantly harm the world's poor increased 12 and 20 percentage points, respectively. The number of Americans who see global warming as a social justice issue increased by 8%. And 7% more Americans now believe the United States should reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, regardless of what other countries do. Pope Francis has had a galvanizing effect upon people of diverse faiths concerned about climate. A month ago, on the Monday night of a long Columbus Day weekend, nearly 600 people packed the sanctuary of Temple Beth Elohim in Wellesley, Massachusetts, for Answering the Call, an interfaith gathering for climate action. Organized by two dynamic Wellesley women, one a Unitarian Universalist, the other a Reformed Jew. The headliner was Father Brian Hare of Harvard University and the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston, speaking on Laudato Si. From that event arose the Massachusetts Interfaith Coalition for Climate Action, which last Wednesday brought 200 religious activists to the Massachusetts State House to lobby our legislators for pro-solar, pro-wind, pro-conservation, and anti-pipeline policies. Just the day before yesterday, the Boston Globe reported that after 500 years of schism, Roman Catholic and Lutheran leaders in the Boston area are seeking to reconcile their communities. Their first cooperative venture? Reading the Pope's encyclical on climate, Laudato Si. A Catholic parishioner in Lexington, Massachusetts, is convening a new network called Connecting Catholics on Climate. Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light, which is historically focused on energy conservation and efficiency in houses of worship, is now partnering with Climate Exchange to support a Massachusetts carbon tax. Here in New Hampshire, Seacoast Interfaith Stewards of the Earth are starting to organize to hold political leaders accountable for their climate policies. Mike Fleming, where are you? This is Mike, he's one of the leaders. So if if you want to get active here in New Hampshire as a religious climate activist, definitely please see mine. Now we have a long way to go before realizing the full potential of people of faith as climate activists. If Christian evangelical groups can make family values a litmus test for politicians in the 1990s, why can't people of faith make climate leadership a litmus test for politicians today? I believe we can, and we must. We must move beyond the four walls of the church, the temple, the mosque, into the voting booth, into the legislative councils, into the corridors of power. Starting at the state and local level, we must elect leaders who understand the urgency of the climate crisis, and we must make our office holders understand that their re-election depends upon their climate leadership. To these ends, I've launched a new nonprofit, the Creation Coalition, dedicated to organizing people of faith as an irresistible political force for climate and environmental justice. This democracy, flawed, distorted, corrupted by the corrosive influence of big money, this imperfect democracy is still ours by right, and it will be ours in fact if and only if we claim it, only if we demand it, only if we do the hard, inglorious, mud-stained, frustrating, essential work of organizing. Mahatma Gandhi once observed, "Those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics do not know what religion is." Pope Francis agrees. He writes in his encyclical, "Love, overflowing with small gestures of mutual care, is also civic and political, and it makes itself felt in every action that seeks to build a better world. Unless citizens control political power, national, regional, and municipal, it will not be possible to control damage to the environment." Unquote. With characteristic hopefulness, Francis also writes, "Human beings, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves, choosing again what is good, and making a new start. The Spirit of God has filled the universe with possibilities, and therefore, from the very heart of things, something new can always emerge."